Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started with tonight's meeting. Thanks for bearing with us with our technical difficulties here. Welcome to CADD Microsystems RevitDC. This is our April edition. Welcome. How many of you all are first-time people here to RevitDC? Welcome. We got a lot of people that have been here before, and I think this is tonight is really kind of a unique group of presentations that we have. So if you're what I call a propeller head, you're really interested in how technology works, you're going to get your fill tonight and a little bit about Revit. So CADD Microsystems runs 4 Revit user groups in Baltimore, and the RevitDC logo isn't up there, but Revit RV in Richmond and in Raleigh. So if you know of anybody that is any one of those cities that you think could benefit from a group like this, please let them know. Tonight we're actually broadcasting to the planet, and I did statistics right before the meeting, and it was interesting because only 16% of the people that watch these YouTube videos are in the United States. So a lot of people around the world are watching this. So I don't know who these people are, but we're trying to spread knowledge throughout the planet. So at any rate, everybody should have gotten an email about these broadcasts. We've been testing this to broadcast live, and we're taping this. So if you see a presentation, we're going to cut it up into the half-hour presentations so that you all can either forward those URLs if you like something you saw or want to review it or want to send it to somebody. That's the concept here. And if somebody live wants to see this. So everybody should have gotten a URL. If you know of anybody that could benefit or would be interested in this, please forward it on. We're just experimenting with this right now. We got the video down. We're kind of, as you see, we're kind of getting all this working, but we're broadcasting live right now on YouTube, and plan to do this for all future meetings. And this is really what this group is about, is kind of getting people together like we're doing tonight, sharing best practices and ideas so that we can build better buildings and really leverage the building information model. So it's run by a board of advisors. These are people that actually look at all the surveys that you all fill out, and at 1 week after each meeting, and we decide what the next meeting is going to be. So we want to keep this relevant, so please fill out those surveys that you get, or you can just send an email to us and say, hey, I'd like to see a topic like this. We take it very seriously. In the absence of your requests, we come up with ideas of presenters, and we do have others that have presented in other user groups, so I think you'll see a lot of the quality of the presentations increasing. Tonight we have 3 seasoned presenters, so we've got really wonderful presenters tonight. So this is a really special group. So we're going to start out with a presentation by Chris Harrison, and this is really about kind of a day-to-day uses of families, how a firm day-to-day would use families. It's a really great presentation. I saw it. He gave it in Richmond, and I asked him to come up here. And then Timon's going to be talking about Dynamo Player for everybody. Like, what is this Dynamo thing? Why do I care about it? And kind of we're doing the same thing with Forge, where Jason will talk about that at the end. So hopefully you'll walk away tonight with some things you didn't know. And hopefully we'll keep everybody's attention throughout all the presentations tonight. I think we got wonderful presenters. So for a big round of applause for Chris for coming up all the way from Richmond to do this presentation for you. So we'll start out with family issues. And you got a mic?
I do. Is it working?
Yeah. Because this has been our big issues when we broadcast this, is we can't really get the sound right because you got to go through a mic. So we're going to be doing all these presentations through mics, and hopefully the canned versions of this will be easy to understand and useful to you later on. All right, Chris?
All right, thank you. Can you guys hear me okay? Good, perfect. Thank you, guys. I just wanted to go over a couple of examples that I use and I share with some of our users relative to families, and mostly formulas and values that you get out of them, and trying to leverage those as best you can. So I'm going to start with a typical drawing sheet that we have in our project. And this is the family view of that same sheet. You can see there's a lot of stuff in here. But I want to focus on 3 particular parts to this title block family. And the first one is going to be the addresses that are up in the top right-hand corner. Back in the project, you can see that when the user clicks on it, he's going to pull up, first he's got drawing sheet up at the top in terms of the project type, or the type property. And under identity data, you can see it says office. It's got a 0 next to it, and then there are 5 cities down below it. And what we're trying to do here is create a parameter and a value that lets the user type in the address that will show up in the title block here. And so we've got more than 5 choices, which is the trick. So this is how I've set it up. All of the addresses are there. And as you can see inside the family, all of those cities down below it, 11 A2, 12 Detroit, 20 DC, has got a formula that says office equals and then a number. Right above that it says office with an integer, which in this case is 0. So the idea here is that you can take each of these different addresses and assign their visibility to 20 Detroit, 30 Baltimore, etc., and then use the number to dial in the proper address. The trick here, again, is an integer. You can't use a text value. It errors out when you try to write office equals Baltimore. It doesn't know what that is. So it has to go to an integer, and that's why then office has an integer. So as a result, the user within the project can take, opens up the project parameters, and under office types in 11, and the Ann Arbor address pops up. So what we're talking about here for good family values is parameter equals an integer. In this case, we can have addresses on title blocks, and what we're getting is more than 2 choices on visibility graphics. That's ultimately what it's coming down to. If you got an opportunity to, if you need more than 2 choices, how are you going to do it? This is a very quick way to be able to toggle between some of the choices that you need. The next example is on the cover sheet. And this is our typical cover sheet here. And in this case, you can see over here on the left-hand side, we've got the addresses there. And so within the family, it's the same sort of setup. I have, this time I have office cover and the 5 addresses. And you can see this time they're listed as, they've got cover in their parameter. And in this case, you can see on the, in the project here, it says 11, so it's going to be pulling up the Ann Arbor address. Inside the family, they're all laid on top of each other for visibility reasons, but you can see the formula that I wrote basically says and cover sheet office cover equals the number. So there's 2 things here. One is being driven by the cover sheet, which was a yes/no parameter, and then what we're then telling it is that the office cover is equal to the number. But what you also see directly above it, it says office office cover, and then it says equals office. So what we're trying to do here is we're trying to allow the users one opportunity to type in an address or type in a number. They get the correct address, and it now shows up in 2 places. And the other aspect is that we have a visibility control when a yes/no parameter is used. In this case, we have and parameter 1, which was our cover sheet. Parameter 2, office cover equals this number, and that's what's driving the ability for the cover sheet to give us the correct address. The last example I want to give on the cover sheet are the stamps, and you'll see that over here on the right-hand side. We've now gone back to the project, and in our drawing sheet, we've got a stamp turned on the right-hand side. And inside the family, it might not be totally clear on this particular view, but there's multiple stamps on top of each other. So within the project, the user pulls up the type parameters and scrolls down and sees stamps on, and that's a yes/no parameter. Directly below it, that says liability stamp, and that's checked, and that's what we see on the cover sheet. And what we're doing inside the family is we are taking stamps on and liability stamp, and then we have two other parameters which are formula driven. We've got the record stamp and the show liability parameter. With those formulas, the record drawing stamp includes the word not in the formula. So in this case, what we're trying to do is we're saying for the end user to turn on stamps, and they're either going to choose the liability stamp or they're going to uncheck it, and by default you will get the record drawing stamp. So in this particular case, the formula includes a not variable in it, and that allows us to control a yes-no parameter in tandem with another yes-no parameter. In this case, stamps on, we're either going to get a liability stamp or we're going to get a record stamp, and that's it. We're going to see something with the checkbox of stamps on. Another example of this is the toilet partition family that I made, and this one's got a lot in it. And in this particular case, I'm more interested in showing you guys the fact that from a user point of view, you can see again how this not parameter is being used. We either have toilet floor or toilet wall. We get toilet wall, toilet floor. So they're going to see a toilet no matter what. As a type parameter, they have to choose which one it's going to be for that family. Within the actual family, the way it all breaks down is, again, just using that not variable to make sure that we're seeing one or the other. I shared this with some other folks in the office, and there was quite a few light bulb moments when they realized they didn't necessarily needed to create two different types of parameters or two different project types, but just creating this as an instance parameter allowed them to then quickly toggle on and off what they needed to. They were going to see it or they weren't going to see it, and it was going to switch between the two. The other example within the toilet family partition was leveraging the use of visibility graphics for coarse, medium, and fine. How many have used this particular, have actually found this dialog box and tried to leverage it in terms of visibility? Good. So in this example, toilet partitions, without doing any without doing a lot of filter control, that's what I was looking for. At 16th scale and higher, I get a single line because it's set, those views are set to coarse. At medium, which is in the middle, I basically have a toilet partition, which for us would be set at 1/8 inch. And then the right-hand side would be set for fine, and that's where my toilet accessories start to show up. In this particular family, at fine, the toilet accessories are shared families that were loaded in, or nested families that were loaded in. So at quarter scale or larger, the team is able to actually, by tabbing through, they're able to tag the toilet accessories right off of this family. So we've created a family that they can drop in once they get the right size, and once they've determined that it's a floor mount or a wall mount, they pretty much have got the entire toilet partition laid out on all of the sheets and are ready to roll. Another example of coarse, medium, fine was where I used it for a fire extinguisher cabinet, and in this case I changed out the graphic at coarse to an annotation graphic, which is the green triangle. Otherwise, two things were happening in our office. One, people couldn't find them or see them at 16th scale, didn't know where they were, and two, they had a tough time, or they didn't circle back and remember to tag them, in this case either FEC1 or FEC2. So at 16th scale, there's a annotation graphic that adjusts with the scale. And then at coarse and fine, you basically see what is on the middle and the right there. The other component to this particular family was that the text was added as a annotation. The annotation was scalable as well. So I have the ability to, and they're always tagged. So once you drop the fire extinguisher cabinet in, it's tagged and it's showing up correctly in the various views as you go through. The only downside to it is that there's a reference plane just below the text that allows me to move that text farther or closer away from the fire extinguisher cabinet. Unfortunately, it's not affected by, well, it's a global setting, excuse me. So at 1/8 inch, I could have it all looking really good, but at quarter scale, it might be way too close because the text got larger. So there's a little bit of a balance on that particular one. So in this particular case, it was just trying to leverage coarse, medium, and fine in the family as quickly as you can so that you weren't having to go through a lot of visibility graphics or filters to get it to look correct at various plans. So lastly, I just wanted to run over some of those that I talked about. Parameter equals integer allows you to create visibility graphics for more than one object. And at this particular case, I had 5 different things that I could toggle between depending on my views. The and parameter 1, parameter 2, allowing me to use the multiple yes-no variables to get things to turn on and off. And adding in the word not to that also allows me to make sure that I am seeing something on my end user side. And then just not parameter. And then coarse, medium, and fine. Allows me to control things at multiple scales. So there we go. I hope that was very quick and made sense. Has anybody got questions? Yes?
Who does the initial project setup?
For?
Just like if you're starting a Revit project, it might be your admin group or your accounting group, or is it project managers themselves who start the project?
So in our office, it's pretty much the project team is going to start the project. We've got I feel, a pretty robust template that just allows folks to jump in and start working.
Yeah, my concern was just like, how do you know that the end users put in the right values, right? Because you have like office codes and you want to load into the templates. So I was wondering how tight you made it.
That's a good question. I didn't make it too tight in terms of step by step, here's what you need to do to get everything up and rolling. But I also know that most of my users are pretty savvy. It takes them one shot and they kind of go, oh, I know what I need to do next time, and keep on going. So, was there another question?
It's kind of similar to the previous question asked. At the project level, you do not see a drop-down list or something that 11, 12, 13, right? It's just you need to know that.
Well, sure. So the question is the option at the user end in terms of what choice they've got. And at the project level, they're going to see everything that's gray. And no, there isn't a pull down that they can select from, but there is the ability to be able to see what's directly below it. So. Okay.
All right, thank you. All right. Well, thank you, Chris, for doing the presentation. That was great. Timon, why don't you want to come on up here? And I was sitting in the back, and I was having a hard time seeing, so I went to YouTube and I searched CADD Microsystems, and I found this live presentation. and then I could look at it on my phone, and it was amazing. I could see the slides, and on my computer, the quality is really good. And I would like to invite everyone here in the room to do the same for a couple different reasons. First of all, Timon, why don't you go ahead and get set up? But first of all, one of the reasons is because when you have people that watch your live presentations with YouTube, they rate you higher, right? And so it'll give our group a higher rating on YouTube and more videos. It just helps us out if you guys log in. So if you don't mind, if you're doing that for us, or just if you feel like it, you don't have to. There's no requirement. Because we got, I think, how many people do we have watching right now? We're up to 15 at one point. Okay. So with that, let's have a big round for Tim for putting this together for the team for Dynamo. Thank you.
Check, 1, 2. I mean, I don't think I really need it for this room, but I can't shout into outer space. So, with that. All right. So with that, my name is Timon Hazell, as he mentioned, and I'm going to be teaching Dynamo Player for everyone. I'm a BIM manager at Silman, and I lead our BIM department in DC and our computational design across the firm, which is New York, Boston, and DC. Feel free to connect with me. I'd love to talk to you more about this. I founded Dynamo DC a few years ago and have been really grateful to get to speak at Built over the last 5 years. And this year my goal was to speak in Europe, and I got accepted to speak in Scotland, so I'm really excited. So I'm going to be traveling over there. At Silman, we do a lot of existing buildings and a lot of new buildings. The projects that come across my desk, just to give you a little context, range from single-story home, renovation, new building, all the way up through, we have our hands on lots of the Smithsonian museums. So as we get started, how many of you here, because we're going to be mostly Dynamo focused, which is on top of Revit, but everyone knows that, so I don't need to talk about what Dynamo is, but how many of you opened Dynamo in the last 2 months? All right, that's looking good. How many of you guys modify scripts on a regular basis? Okay. And how many would consider themselves a Dynamo guru? All right, I wouldn't even consider myself a Dynamo guru. But, all right, so how did Dynamo become a household word? For those who don't know, this is your 2-second introduction to Dynamo. Basically, Dynamo allowed for people to customize and not have to look at any of the coding in the back. So instead of looking at something like this, you're able to look at a node like this, and you can see the input and the output, and you can kind of create your own custom scripts, your own custom tools inside or on top of Revit and outside of Revit, but most people use it with relation to Revit. So Dynamo versus Dynamo Player. So Dynamo would look like this, and for those of you that are more on the guru side, everyone else thinks this looks like a spaghetti mess. But sometimes I look at this and I'm like, oh, but I like it. I know what things are connected. I know how things are flowing. But other users in my office might look at this and be like, I'm never opening that. I'm going to break something. It's scary. And so Dynamo Player allows for a couple of these nodes to be set as inputs. And then the user can just hit a play button, modify the inputs that they need, and the same script will run and give them the output that you're looking for. So you can build something, and then someone else can use it, but they don't have to look at this, because even if you want to get everyone to use this, you'll have less people using your tools if you stick to just using them inside of Dynamo and not starting to port them over to Dynamo Player. It's pretty simple, though. So not everything is Dynamo friendly, and the biggest limitation is inputs. So I'm going to look at a couple of scripts that I've done and talk about the inputs for them to kind of get you thinking in that way. So what's a Dynamo-friendly process? For example, we were working on a structure where the ceiling was curved, but the roof was faceted. And, we needed to put our structure within that space. And so one of the questions we had is, okay, within that space, how much depth do you have to put your structure in there? And so we created a heat map like this that provided kind of space between those two surfaces. So is this good for Dynamo Player? On one hand, it's good because the inputs are inputs that Dynamo Player can use. It's basically picking an element or picking a face. Those are available. It's not so friendly for Dynamo Player because how many times am I going to be using this in my firm? Any thoughts? Maybe once, maybe twice. Now, if it was regular coordination where on this specific project they were doing this regularly, or we knew this was something we would be doing regularly, then yeah, we could put it into Dynamo Player, make a project-specific folder, and they can run Dynamo Player just for that project in there, and then it would work. But I don't need this when I'm working on another project because they're just so different. Another example that's on one hand a little bit better, a little bit worse, but for example, looking at load changes for a building renovation. So green shows a reduction in load, so those columns and footings are going to be good. Red shows an increase in load, so those need to be reviewed. So something like this, on one hand, it's easier for Dynamo Player or it's better for Dynamo Player because it might be repeatable between projects, but the inputs on it are a little bit less clear. It's a little harder to say what the inputs are here, so I'm going to say this is not a good Dynamo Player application. But a third one here, this would be a good application. So for example, looking at something and trying to understand a parameter, but visualizing it, right? So when you're back-checking, when you're looking at something, and you want to know, okay, in my slab, what are the thicknesses of my slabs around this plan? And so we can visualize the color just by reading a parameter and then coloring it by that parameter. So the input for this would be just the thickness of the element. But the thickness of the element isn't actually the input. The input is just the elements and what parameter to look at. So the inputs are totally feasible to be in the selection that Dynamo Player allows for. And then the script, and I'm not focusing on the scripts that you could do in Dynamo. That's a whole other presentation we could be doing. This is specifically on Dynamo Player and how to take scripts that you may have already and port them over. So another one, a little bit more complex. You may have seen this one before. As I presented, but looking at grids between two models and trying to say, okay, so we have the coordination monitoring, right copy monitor. And that works sometimes, but if you make a new grid, it's not going to tell you, oh, there was a new grid in the model. Or if someone renames a grid and then moves it, it's still thinking those two grids are connected, so it has some deficiencies. What we have is a script that basically will create an email that says, here are your problems with your grids, and wouldn't that be nice to be able to tell all your clients, hey, here are the issues with your grids, could you fix them, instead of having to go through every single one and looking at them. So the question is here, what are the inputs? What's the basic, there's only one input that I need to control for this. Anybody want to think about what that input is? Grids. It's not grids, although that is an input, but it's always grids, so I don't have to have the user change that. But what's one input that the user is going to change as they're coordinating with different links in the model? Which link? Exactly. And so that's the only input that this takes, and the rest runs and creates an email. So I've talked about inputs. I haven't talked a lot about outputs. Usually when I talk about Dynamo, I talk about inputs and I talk about outputs. Your outputs are not limited when you're working with Dynamo Player. So you can generate an email. You can generate an Excel file. You can do anything that you can think of as an output. You could modify colors. It's the inputs and what you're asking your users to choose between. And if you want a lot of variability, then Dynamo Player is probably not the best. But if you can have a specific business use case and you can make that into a script, that's where Dynamo Player really comes in. So some of the inputs, we'll talk about this a little bit more, but I want to get to our live demo. And my clock didn't start here, so how are we doing on time? We're good. All right. So let's build well, first let's look at it. So Dynamo Player lives in your Revit managed toolbar. On the right-hand side here, we've got Dynamo and right to the next of it is Dynamo Player. And if you're following along on the iPhone or your screen, you might see it better, but it's on here. So I'm going to click on Dynamo Player, and it's going to launch this. This is Dynamo Player, and a few things to highlight in here are the obvious, very obvious play buttons, which are going to play the scripts. You can choose the folder that Dynamo Player is accessing. You can update the folder. If like you change something in the folder, you can revise it. Go to the help. That I don't have internet here. That'll open the help file on basics of Dynamo Player. And then a filter here, which is kind of nice. So if I know I'm thinking I want something to do with a parameter, I could type in parameter in my list, because as you can see, and hopefully this will come with future versions, but you can only get a few Dynamo scripts in here before it starts getting busy. So there's like tricks you can do, like automatically remapping your folder and things like that. But at the basic level, you're going to come in here and just search. So I'm searching for a parameter. Here are some scripts that I have. So I might, for example, looks like it's already been run here. So I'm just going to reset this. So if I have these columns, for example, and I want to color the elements by a parameter, I could take these columns, and when I was looking through them, I noticed some of them, the top offset was 1 foot, and some of them, the top offset was 0 feet, and one is wrong. It needs to be 0. So going through here, I could look at an elevation to figure out which ones they were, or, fingers crossed this works, because once you get into live demo, anything can change. Select model elements, so I can select my model elements. I can say what parameter do I want to color. So I'm going to color based on a parameter called top offset. Has to be typed in exactly the same. I've selected these, I think already twice, and I hit play. It runs, and that's what I was worried about. They're not all equal, yeah. But this is what happens when you try to do. All right. So sorry about the PAL there. Half of them will be blue, and half of them will be red, thus showing us which ones are 1 foot and which ones are 0. So let's look now at how to build a script, a very simple script, and then how to make it consider Dynamo Player as we're building it. So the first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to close Dynamo Player, and I'm going to open Dynamo. And what we're going to do is we're just going to set a parameter with a string. So we're going to input a string, and we're going to set a parameter. For example, maybe on sheets, we might choose the issue date, and we might set that. So you don't have to go to every sheet and change it. So, sorry. So I'm going to go to New. So first thing I'm going to do for this is I'm going to get my category of all the sheets to start with. And then I'm going to choose a parameter that I want to put that string into. Sorry, that's going to be a string. So I'm going to type the parameter in with a string, and I'm going to choose the category that I'm going to update. Can you see that? Make it a little bigger. Now I'm going to set parameter set the parameter with the name. So I have now the category of sheets, and I need elements. So I'm going to select all the elements of the category. There we go, all elements of category. So I feed the category into the category input, and the elements into the elements. Parameter name is going to be our string. And then our value is going to be another string. So it's about as basic as Dynamo can get. And so now, when we look at these nodes, when we right-click, there's a drop-down that says is input. So I'm going to say yes, categories is an input. and I want to rename it to give the user information. So select the category. And then a string, and that is an input also. I'm going to rename it to say enter parameter name. And then we're going to choose just a string, so enter string or text. Because string is what I would call it, but my users are going to call it just text. So enter text. And so now I'm going to save this. Into my RevitDC folder here. I'm going to call it enter string to parameter. And then I'm going to close it. So it has all of them marked as inputs, the ones that I want the user to choose. And then I go into Dynamo Player. I'll refresh this. Now we have one here that we just created together called enter string to parameter, right? So I didn't talk about this earlier, but there's two little buttons here. The first button is edit the inputs. So if I click on that, and it kind of looks like a box and a slider. Personally, I think it needs a little bit of help to know which one is edit the inputs and which one is edit the document. So this one, you'll see here, the titles come in from what I put into Dynamo. So select the categories, enter parameter name, and enter text. So let's, for example, go to a sheet, and what's a parameter we want to update? Let's say it's the sheet issue date. I check to make sure it's a text. I'm going to go here. I'm going to choose sheets, and I'm going to say, so it's going to apply it to all of that category, all elements in the model. Enter the parameter name. So hopefully no typos here. Sheet issue date. And then enter text. We'll say April 9th, 2019. And then we hit play. And you'll notice here, April 9th, 2019 went to this sheet. I go to the other sheet. Its sheet issue date was also edited, and so on. So it took every element right away. Any user could do that. The next day it changes. They come in here and they're like, oh, we actually changed the issue date. We changed it to April 10th. Hit play. All the sheets get revised, right? So we took a little bit of Dynamo here, but the key is we chose inputs that worked for the users. They can change them. I did use issue date. This is a beginner level, kind of for everyone level for Dynamo Player. There's two other ways you can get inputs for Dynamo Player. First is what we're doing. The second is you can actually have pop-up wizards. So there's something called data shapes, and you can, I think it's called data shapes. And it will actually allow you to create your own pop-ups without a lot of coding background. And you can create your own windows, and you can put your own, you can put drop-downs in there and text values and put other information into it. And it can be a little bit more dynamic and a little more kind of, you can control a little bit more of what the user is going to see when. And that has a lot more power. It's a lot more advanced. So I decided to keep it out of this presentation. We could do another one specifically just on that because it's a little complex. And then the third way, which if you know how to do this, then you already know about it, and that is that you can create your own within Python or C#, your own types of inputs and your own pop-ups. So any questions on just this very basic input system? All right. So let's look just at a couple more scripts that you could also use in your company. So for example, now we're a structural engineering firm. We work with you. We work with your title blocks. And we work with your numbering systems. Yes, there's a standard numbering system in America, but everyone who's a designer has decided they're going to use a different numbering system for some different reason. So we'll oftentimes start out our project with our sheet numbers as like S-100, and then all of a sudden 2 weeks later it's like, oh, no, we're doing S1.00, and then later on a different project, it's like the Wild West, right? So what I've done is we have something. So as you can see, our sheet numbers here, they're really small, but it's like S dash, see if I can make this bigger, maybe like this? No? That just centers it. So we have update numbering scheme. So if I go here to update numbering scheme, and it says, what category are you updating? Obviously, it's sheets. What's your new numbering scheme? I could go in here and type S.S1.00, so it's changing from dashes to dots, and I hit play. It's going to go through everything, and it's going to change it to S number dot number. And that saves a lot of time, so you're not having to go through there every one and click it differently. And so last, I think, if you're coming up here, I'm assuming my time's getting close. So we're going to look at that grid coordination. So I'm going to open the grid coordination script. I got plenty of time? All right, we've got plenty of time. Well, that's great. We have a couple better ones coming up. So check grid alignment. While that opens up, it takes a little bit longer to open up. It's got a lot of different packages, and that'll give us the opportunity to talk a little bit about packages. So Dynamo Player works with packages just like every other part of Dynamo. But be warned, if you're using packages, you're using somebody else's code without really looking at it. So what did we say about families, and probably still say about families, when everyone was downloading families from RevitDC, or Revit City? From Revit City, right? Review them, make sure they're all good, don't bring anything bad in. It's kind of the same thing with the packages, that someone should vet them. Well, maybe I can't code. Maybe I don't know how to vet them. Well, a pretty good way to vet them is if 100,000 other users on Dynamo are using them, it's probably been vetted. But just know that those packages are just this, like, they're very, very powerful. And so I just like to put a little bit of caution out there as people are using them. But they're great, and I use packages when I'm working in Dynamo. So this is the script, right? So I've been working on it. I know exactly how it works. I tell Jason, could you come over and whenever you need it, go ahead and run this script. Yeah? And he looks at it and he goes, OK. I know Timon said pink is input. OK, but what am I supposed to do with these inputs? So instead, what I've done is remember we talked about the link. So I put a unique name of link. So anything in the link that's unique. So if there's like architectural something, structural something, then you would just have to put structural, for example. And then we can close it. Everything else has been disabled, so it's not a link right now. And of course, it's a live presentation, so the probability of this working right now is next to nothing. But check grid alignment with link. Before I do that, I'm going to go to plan. That's not plan, of course. And I'm going to ask Dana to come up here onto this computer, not really, and I'm going to race her to see who can find the grids that are not coordinated with the architectural to see who's faster. And of course, it's a live demonstration. So check grid alignments. I'm going to click the input. I'm doing this over and over again so that hopefully you see that it's like not that scary to get things into Dynamo Player. So little word warning. If you have Dynamo open, Dynamo Player won't run. So you have to close that. So I hit the inputs. It's now doing the same thing. It's opening the packages. It's checking what's in there. So it could take a minute or two sometimes to load. But Dana, how are you doing? OK. I went over here. I looked at the link name. I see link in the name, and that's the only thing I need. Can we see the input up here? I'm going to put it to the top of the screen so everyone in the back can see that there's text there even if you can't read it. And then I hit play. And then I go to lunch, right? Oh, wait. I don't need to go to lunch. It's already run. It's finished. And it says, the following grids exist in the Silman model, or maybe in your model, but cannot be found in the linked model. And so I could then send this email to my project manager or to our client and say, hey, are these grids important? Do you want to put them in your model or not? Or more importantly, you, I'm assuming most of you are architects, can kind of help control your consultant's models, because they may be copy monitoring the links from you, so that'll tell them information, but it's not going to tell you if they create a new grid, and they need it, right? Structural engineers, we need extra grids. And then the following grids are off by 1 foot. So I'm not going to go through how I created the script. I'm more than happy to give it to Jeff so we can upload it and share it with everybody. But the thing here is that we thought about the inputs. And the only input that I needed my user to choose was a little bit of text. So when I had Dynamo looking all crazy spaghetti, then people are like, well, I don't know if I'm going to use it. But if it's one button in Dynamo Player, then they're like, oh, wait. Oh, I can coordinate my grids now? That's great. I'm just going to keep doing that. So some other things that are in here are, for example, how can you map one parameter to another parameter? I think I've seen presentations here that use that for other purposes. And what if you could map any parameter to any parameter, right? So we did it earlier manually with just a string. But what if I went into here and I said, where is it? Map parameter within category. So the inputs that I gave the user is a category. So let's choose sheets. And then category with, or it says category. It's wrong. It's the parameter with the info. So what parameter has the info? Let's go choose, for example, a column. So I have a column location markup here, B-2. And let's say I need that for another reason somewhere else, and it's actually not something I can put in my schedule, right? I can't filter my schedules. It can work with the graphical column schedule, but not with another schedule. So let's say I need to put it over to comments. I'm not recommending this. I'm just showing this as an example of moving a parameter from one to another. So I'm going to go here and say category to, or parameter to receive the info is comments. The parameter that has the info is my column location mark. And for those of you who are in the room who are like, I'm not a structural engineer, I don't need to work with column locations, dream up another category that you might potentially need to move a parameter from one to another. Or maybe you need to multiply it by something and then put it into a value. So here, column location mark. So I'm going to hit play. It's going to look at all the columns.
Columns, category.
Thank you.
Up at top. Category is a set of sheets.
Structural columns. So I just moved the column location mark, which didn't do anything. So structural, if I could be alphabetical, structural columns, hit play, and it says, oh, here's the elements I just updated. I can go down here, look at the comments. There it is, B-2. And now I'm definitely getting the hint from above. So I'm going to end, hopefully, with an easy button. And wouldn't it be great if you could just hit one button and wait a little bit, and wait a little bit.
It's happening live in front of you, and at no time do your fingers leave
Yeah,
your
and
hands.
hopefully on YouTube, this part is like cut down to like 3 seconds. But
Well, I think this is fascinating that you and Chris didn't coordinate your presentations, but you kind of talked about some of the same topics about how to get to the same end a different way. And I think that's fabulous because it's something everybody has to deal with sheets. And did your easy button work?
no, it didn't work. Sorry, guys.
And welcome to Dynamo. This is Dynamo.
Welcome to
Innovation.
Dynamo. That's right. So last thing, I really do actually want to say, like, Chris's presentation is important. If you're at a firm and you're working with title blocks, consider your consultants who are working with 80 title blocks. And think about how you can make your title blocks smarter, because we can really see which architectural firms understand BIM quite a bit just from looking at their title blocks. So with that, why don't we go to questions?
All right.
Mic drop.
Any questions on any of this? Good.
Yes.
Three-part. How do you control your package
Yeah, that's a really great question. We're not doing it the best way. The best way is for your IT team to copy packages onto people's personal computers or work computers, because then as they're going, they have them, and it doesn't take as long to load. That's definitely the recommended way to do it. The way we do it is we have a network location, and all the packages live on that network location. There is a known issue with Dynamo that your network location has to be a small drive, or it takes a day and a half to load them. But the real truth is we're moving more and more away from packages and more into, I'm spending a lot more time in Python coding it inside of Dynamo so that I know that it's going to work 100% of the time.
Perfect segue to the next question.
Yep.
Which is, how do you decide when to make something Dynamo Player ready versus a tool?
Say that again.
Dynamo Player ready versus a tool. When do you make that decision?
Yes, that's a great question. The question is, when do I take something that's an idea, and I'm going to actually develop it a little bit further. When do I take an idea and make it a script? When do I take a script and make it available to the entire office? And when do I make it a button, which you said Dynamo Player, we're actually making UI buttons a lot more. So it's a great question. So if the script has usage beyond a single project, it goes usually into a button or Dynamo Player. But it really only goes into the UI if it's applicable to almost every project. We have like project-specific folders, but other than that, it'll go to everyone. One thing to consider, and what we typically do, is we'll do like project-specific scripts, but then once they're used a second time, then we make them more generalized for the entire office. Because you can't always guess every variations that's going to happen until you work on a second project with a script. So, yep.
How do you do error reporting within Dynamo Player so that you can get, if there's a problem with one of those, that you can get feedback on where the issue?
So you have a great question, and it's definitely one of the issues specifically with Dynamo Player. So I actually have a node that tracks things, and I put it inside of our script, and it'll track to a network location every time something gets run, and it can. It doesn't report errors. Our other code does report errors, but in Dynamo it doesn't. And sadly, users are not very good about telling you when something's broken, and they just stop using it. So that's typically the fastest way. An alternative is that same node could have an output at the end to see if it finished. Good question. Anybody else? Yes.
How are you displaying the list of things that were changed in the player? Is that an output thing?
Yes, I didn't touch on that at all. So if you want an output of just a list to show up in your Dynamo Player, all you have to do is take a watch node and rename it. Once it is named anything other than watch, it will show up as an output in your Dynamo Player. So that's how those lists, I had like lists of unused grids, I had lists of elements changed. It's just a watch node, you rename the title. Yep. Any other questions? All right. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Timon. I think that was very interesting. Just an observation. Chris and him didn't coordinate the presentation, but it starts out that really, and this really wasn't kind of the theme tonight, but it's kind of working out this way, is that the first presentation was on how you can program inside of Revit with families, which is really the basic. I mean, you're basically programming just in a family way, right? And then Timon showed you a little bit more advanced way that's kind of a lot more portable, if you will, but a lot more sophisticated than just using families, but kind of almost the same thing. And now what we're going to see is we're going to see a presentation. So we went from like today to where we're going in the near future to where we're going in the farther future. So the presentation, and I asked Jason to do this presentation because I'm very curious myself because I've been watching what they're doing in Forge. I understand it, but it's fascinating where we're going with the ability to be able to program at the highest level on servers in the ubiquitous cloud, right? The cloudy servers to do things across the globe. So with that, I asked Jason to explain what Forge is and why should we care about it. So let's have a big round of applause for him putting together a presentation for us. Thank you.
Thanks. Thanks. All right, this is okay. I got thumbs up for Donnie, so we're going to rock and roll. So my name is Jason. I'm Senior Practice Manager over at CADD Microsystems. One of their consultants, so we do training
I focus partially on the development end. So recently I spent some time up at a place that I affectionately refer to as Nerd Camp. Autodesk has what they call their accelerators. So they bring a bunch of people together, and this one recently I went to was specifically on Forge, focusing on the design automation API for Revit. So we're going to get there. We're going to get to Revit. First and foremost, before I rock and roll to my fellow alumni out there, wahoo-ah. This is the only time I've ever had a sports-related slide in my slide deck, and maybe the last time I ever have a sports-related slide in my slide deck as well. Do want to give everybody fair warning. We're going to dial the nerd level up to about 11 here. But to be fair, you all chose to come to a software user group meeting. So this is on you partially as well. With that, want to get us on a little baseline. We'll talk real quick about APIs. Want to make sure we're talking the same thing. We know kind of what they are. It's all going to build on that. Talk a little bit about the Revit API. Then we're going to dive into Forge. And like I said, we're going to spend a lot of time, not a lot of time, spend most of my time on the design automation API for Revit portion of Forge. Like Jeff mentioned, this is, we're kind of building, it was family programming, Dynamo programming, kind of from another aspect. You can go tomorrow and probably take what Chris talked to you about and apply it. Timon's presentation, probably within a week or so, you can kind of build on this. This is not going to be something you're going to do in a week or two, but what I want this to be is kind of more inspirational. So to get you thinking about how you can use this and leverage this, because this is higher end design process workflow change. This is not exclusively how to speed up getting my sheets built or my Revit model built, which is absolutely important. But this takes things to a little higher step there. So I don't like crazy hyperbole. I don't want to say this is going to change the world or it's going to make your life infinitely easier. I am really excited about the potential here, though. There are some asterisks that I'm going to throw out there at the very end just so you kind of know exactly where it is. I don't want everybody leaving here with rainbows and unicorns and not understanding the reality of what can come. So with that, APIs, 30,000 feet. What is an API? API is standing for Application Programming Interface. It is a tools, it is functions, it's functionality within inside software that allows developers to access and plug into that software. So it's kind of a middleman. It's a middleman between two applications. Another way we can look at it is you've got the UI, you've got the user interface, that's on the front end. That's what we usually access to get into. And then the API is the back end of things. So Word has an API. Revit, of course, has an API. Excel has an API. Most of us use the user interface to get in there. But if I want to automate some things, if I want to build some of my own tools that use the features and the functionality in there, I need to leverage the API to do that. And the API is going to be created by whoever wrote that software. So they're going to expose certain functions of the software, certain portions are going to write the rules and tell me how I can tap into there. Inside the Revit API specifically, it is, number one, made for Revit. Has not been around forever. So I've been using Revit longer than any other design software at this point. When I first started using Revit, and probably when a lot of you guys did too, there was no API. You couldn't get in there. And I don't know if I convinced myself of this, but I feel like they said there never would be an API either. But there is now. There has been for several years, and it's pretty solid. And for some reason, I'm getting a security warning from Windows that I'm going to cancel here. But since it hasn't been around forever, as new features are introduced into Revit, those new features are in the API. But on the flip side, for old features, most of them are in there. Some of them are not. And if it's not in the API, you can't programmatically touch it. For some reason, you cannot make a ceiling with the API. Nobody knows why. You just can't do it. You make walls, floors, roofs, whatever else you want. Ceilings, nope, no ceilings. No ceiling access in the API. Ceilings have been around forever. A lot of the new functionality, a lot of the new MEP stuff, all the new rebar stuff, anything new, you can get to it in the API. That's kind of a general rule of thumb. So it lets programmers access and modify your Revit files without the Revit user interface, but it must be run through Revit. So if you run your add-ins, if you write a macro, that all happens inside of Revit. I open up Revit, I run my add-in, which I created the API, and then I can access my file that way. There are tons of examples out there. We were just talking about Dynamo. Dynamo is kind of a skin over top of the API. So if the API can't do it, Dynamo can't do it. And Tim was talking about using Python. He is punching through. He is punching through there, and he is literally accessing the API when you're doing Python development in there. That's API direct access. Just kind of step through Dynamo there. Autodesk also. Autodesk will release their own add-ins that they develop through the API that are not baked directly into the functionality of Revit, but they want it to do something. We got the model checker here, Kobe extension, Roombook extension is another one out there. The site designer, which originally was not made by Autodesk, but it's an add-in. It's an add-in that you install in there. It's not automatically inside of Revit. Developers make some. I'm very biased. This is our Filter Plus. We make add-ins. If you're not using it, you're wasting your time. But aside from that, third-party developers will make it. And then, of course, there's stuff we don't make, other people make. Keynote Manager. Oh, shoot. I just had the other example today that I can't even think of. Rushworth is out there. I mean, everybody's probably got a tool you like that is an add-in that somebody used the Revit API to create. There's a blog out there, revitaddons.blogspot.com. Is that right? Does anybody know what I'm talking about? Anyway, there's a blog. Guy tracks all the add-ins, does nice little write-ups for them. It's a great way to kind of pay attention to what's being written and what's being created out there. So, our quick summary. Our API lets a programmer develop an application that touches other parts of another software. Revit has its API, and Revit add-ins must be run inside of Revit. So that's our baseline. We're going to start dipping our toes into Forge. Who has heard of Forge at this point? All right. OK. That's a good number. Who is actively working in Forge? OK, that's a much smaller number. All right. Design automation or just other Forge APIs? Other Forge. Other Forge. OK. So this is kind of a lot here, but what it boils down to is Forge is a series and a collection of APIs that Autodesk is developing. They're web-based, so you've got to somehow get to the internet to use them, but they're being designed specifically for their software, their tools, and their industries as well. So they are there to kind of support our workflows and enhance our workflows and enhance how we interact with their software. That last bullet point, the current version of BIM 360, I'm assuming everybody's heard of BIM 360 now, you're probably using BIM 360, that is built on the Forge API. So they are using their own software development tools to develop software. They are eating their own dog food at this point. Older version of BIM 360, no, but current generation, yes. So a lot of the stuff I'm going to point out and what the API does, you're going to say, oh, that looks exactly like X from BIM 360. Yes, that's because Autodesk is using these APIs to build their own tools as well. This is the whole collection of the different APIs inside of Forge. So we've got 9 here. I'm going to just touch on each one just so you know what they do. Some are fun, some are terrible. I don't mean terrible. Some are boring. But the idea is you don't have to just pick one when you're developing software. You can do a couple. I mean, the things we were working on at a minimum would use 2 of these and then usually tap into an API that had nothing to do with Autodesk at all. That was one of the nice things. You start connecting up these different databases or software or tools or utilities or workflows by tapping into here. So first one, TokenFlex API. It's boring. It's just awful. Yeah, unless you're giants and you need to know about this, don't worry about this one. Reality Capture API. This allows you to convert your photos into 3D models. So this is Recap. I don't know if Recap is directly using the Reality Capture API, but there is an API that you can tap into with your own applications to convert your photos into models if you want to. That is that API. Data management. This is simply file management in my BIM 360 folders. So if I want to move a file, if I want to rename a file, if I want to copy all my files from my BIM 360 project to my Dropbox folder, I'm going to access that using the data management API, move and juggle and move and scoot all those files around. The next one we've got here is authentication. It's important, but it's very boring. This is about logging in. This is about authenticating my application. This is making sure I have credentials and permission to do things to my files in BIM 360. Model derivative, so it's got a really cool name. It's fine. It's, you know, it's whatever. It will convert a series, there's a whole list, like 30 different file types that it will convert either to SVF, OBJ, or an STL file. So the SVF format, if you've used the large model viewer, if you've clicked on your file in BIM 360, that is an SVF file. So as soon as you upload certain files to BIM 360, the model derivative API kicks in and it'll convert that file over to you. But you can access the model derivative functionality on files that are not inside of BIM 360. So if I want to take my Revit file on my server, on my web server somewhere, I can convert it into that format that I can use the viewer for. And it makes thumbnails. Yeah, that's great. So webhooks. Webhooks are kind of cool. So this is not my model automation, or the one we're going to be talking about at the end. But this one's pretty neat. So this one you can actually create subscriptions. You can monitor activities going on in your BIM 360 folders or file structure, and you can have it ping out to a web service that you develop. So if you want a tweet to be sent every time somebody synchronizes with a Revit model up in your BIM 360 account, you can use webhooks to do that. Obviously, a little more practical, maybe send an email to the team when somebody uploads a file or something. But it's automated. You kind of subscribe to something. You tell it what to do once that activity happens. And then it kicks it off and makes that happen. So this is a really, I think, going to be powerful one. And it's pretty simple and pretty straightforward, which is kind of fun about it. The BIM 360 API, so account admin, document management, those are all very similar to the other ones. The ones at the bottom I find interesting are issues, RFIs, and checklists. So if you've been paying attention to the additions to BIM 360, these new APIs line up directly with it. So I can only modify issues, RFIs, and checklists inside of BIM 360. But if I don't like the BIM 360 interface, if I want to do it in bulk, if I want to do anything automated-wise, I can make a program that will impact my issues, my RFIs, and my checklists inside of my BIM 360 project. If I want to sync it up, if I've got a project management solution over here in my network, I could build some sort of interface, some sort of hook that when I send an RFI up here, it'll actually create that RFI in my BIM 360 project. So again, we're going through that back door. We're skipping around the UI, and we're hopefully taking some steps out of procedures that we have before. Viewer is the one everybody usually sees. Opens 3Ds and 2Ds files. This is, you click on it. But again, if you use the Viewer API, you don't necessarily have to use this to look at only models that are inside of BIM 360. All right, design automation. This is the last one. This is cloud-hosted access to your design software API. Revit just came out this year. It's all in beta. AutoCAD has been out a while. They've got 3ds Max, they've got Inventor, but honestly, I only looked at Revit, so that's all I'm going to talk about at that point. But I think the concept is all the same. As a baseline for this specific API, it can be a desktop or a web-based application, but it has to be internet accessible. I've got to be able to make that call to that design automation API on the web. My program can be a Windows program. It doesn't have to be a web application. Most of the examples we see are web pages just because they're a little easier to develop and roll out and test, but don't feel like you need to be limited to that. Your files can already be on the web or you can upload them to the web, but they've got to get to the internet somehow. So if you've got security concerns or things like that, this is probably not the way to go. It's essentially headless Revit. It is Revit sitting in the cloud that I'm going to fire off my function, and it's going to make something happen inside a model. Most of the examples we have seen, people have taken an existing Revit add-in, and they've started cleaning it up. They've removed the user interface, they've simplified it, they've stripped it down into a process that it can be automated. It can be scheduled, you don't need any interaction. Because then any interaction you need is going to have to happen then in your new application. It's not going to happen inside of Revit anymore. All right. So conceptualize, what can we do with this? Offset processor heavy tasks from your PC. We've been using rendering in the cloud forever. This is kind of moving some of the more just processor stuff, just add-ins, just DLLs, things that you used to have to wait your computer to do. Let the other server do it and get back to work. If the Revit API could do it, you pretty much can do it in the Design Automation API. Revit is not needed. So this is hopefully where some light bulbs are starting to flick. This is where my light bulb started to turn on as well. You do not need Revit to run a Design Automation API application. You do need a Revit model. You're still doing something to a Revit file, but I do not need to have Revit. It means I do not need to have a license of Revit. But somewhere along the way, I have to have a Revit model that I'm working with. What it really kind of broad strokes cracks things open into is collaboration on my design model between teams, irregardless of what software they have. It opens up this back door into my model for people who do not have Revit. Revit has a bit of a high learning curve. You know, everybody's a Revit user, so we all know it, we all have it, but there are certainly some people you know at your firm you do not want ever to open up Revit, and you do not want them to ever directly touch your model with Revit. Some specific examples. I mentioned NerdCamp. Well, a couple of these examples are from NerdCamp that we saw. We don't have any screenshots. It was all a little bit proprietary. And one of the examples I have is actually from Twitter. So this was a neat one. This was an online family parameter editor. So the idea here, and I say idea, they had a working prototype. Somebody takes a family file. They upload it to this website. They are given then a web page of a series of parameters that they wanted injected into that family file. They are shared parameters. So, you know, my GUID's all fine and it's all there because all of the shared parameter file and everything in there is being controlled inside of Design Automation. I don't have to send out my text file and hope they connect to the right text file and get the right shared parameter file in there. They upload the family file. They say, give me all these parameters. In fact, not only that, here's a text field. Start filling in these parameters on a web page. They click a button, and then a little bit of churning, and then that RFA file is sent back to them with the proper parameters and a lot of the proper data already in there. Their next step was they're going to put a bulk kind of added on. So you upload a bunch of RFA files, you click a button, they come back, all the right shared parameters are already in there, ready to go. Residential model builder. This was a pretty interesting one as well. So I'm not sure why he went down this road. He's been doing it for a while, but basically had one residential model, and then he was using options and option sets. So no phases, but kind of, you know, the patio is this, and it's option A or option B. Everything was broken into option sets. So just gobs of option sets in this one model. And then obviously kind of going to a customer and saying, what ones do you want, and parsing those out can be a little tricky. So all this was a website that had access to Design Automation, had access to his kind of super model, and people would check a box saying what option they wanted, and then Design Automation would just strip out all the options it didn't care about, get rid of all the option sets, and then serve up a single model that was customized exactly the way they wanted. Except, again, no Revit, no interaction, just clicking some buttons and waiting a little bit on a web page. So I like that one a lot. This was the one we were working on. I'm on the development team for the model checker, so a little biased about the model checker. But one of the things we would like to expand that to would be to give some more accessibility to owners. A lot of owners don't have Revit, but they're certainly putting their projects inside of BIM 360. So instead of requiring them to have Revit and download the model and run the model checker, they just go to a website, they select a model, they select a check, they click run, and they get that model checker report straight from the website. The last one I had, this is one that one of the Autodesk developers has been working on. He's kind of posted on over Twitter periodically. He's playing with like a living room layout. So it's just kind of a 2D graph interface. He draws some lines and he places some things. And it's not Revit. It's just kind of a web interface. And then he gets a Revit model once he's done with it. So he's got a lot of work to go, but the potential is there. So All right, here are our caveats. Here's the things to watch out for. It is definitely still in beta. Super duper in beta. So play with it, start thinking of ideas, kick some things around, but don't, change everything you're doing to kind of work in this at this point. Whoa. Okay. Documentation currently is very spotty. We'd be doing a lot of searching. We'd try to figure out what the API is doing. Turns out it was an article from 2 years ago. So make sure you're looking at the correct version of your documentation of the API that you're working on there. There is one pretty significant issue with the Revit design automation, and the development team is 100% aware of it, and it's the top one they're working on. Currently, there is no way to access work shared models. It basically makes a copy of your file, not a local copy, just a copy. So the idea is if you've got a Revit model and you need to work on it, it kind of puts it over in this quarantine zone on Amazon Web Services, and that's what design automation works on. So it's removed from any sort of work sharing. Family files are fine. Family files you upload and you're done. Solo, non-work shared models are fine as well. You upload them and they're good to go. Read-only stuff on the models is fine too, obviously. But any sort of interaction you need to do on a work shared model, right now they're trying to work on that. Just start thinking about how it's going to kind of change your world forever after that as well. All right, here's my crazy thoughts for the future. I do not work for Autodesk. I do not speak for Autodesk. But reading the tea leaves, this is crazy 5-year stuff down the road. This is starting to take the Revit out of the Revit file. We're removing that piece. We're making it more of a BIM database, as something we've always said it can do, but it really was only sort of doing at that point. I don't think that design automation, the functionality is the final form of how this is going to take. And this is 5, 10, 15 years, if ever, in the future. But I do think that the people working inside of design automation, they're going to be developing the workflows and the processes, and how it impacts and it gets used is going to help define kind of the evolution of how this Revit model in the cloud, this cloud-hosted database, is going to look in the future. Because ultimately, our Revit model in the cloud doesn't need to be a single database or a single file, just multiple databases pointing at each other and little Doc Brown craziness out there for you. So, again, apologies for that. We definitely took it up a little bit. Hopefully you got some thoughts there, some ideas out of there. And wrapping up, is everyone still awake? Forge is your web-based API for design industry, design innovation for API. Ultimately, ideally, hopefully, can open up your models, your Revit models, to your non-Revit users. So there's the ubiquitous question mark slide in everybody's PowerPoint presentation. Any questions? Yeah.
Currently, can design automation do any printing tasks?
I mean, no, because it doesn't have local access to your printer. You could probably generate a PDF.
PDF printing?
Yep. Yep. Yes, sir.
Is CAD going to be developing things on top of Forge or Revit?
CAD is currently developing some things right now. Yes.
What are these?
Time's up, Jason. Good meeting. Thank you very much.
There you go.
There's a lot of tools that we've been developing in the past that you've probably seen. So you can probably guess what we're going to be developing for the future with Autodesk. So any other questions? All right. Well, I thought these were three great presentations that kind of built on their own and got you to the point where hopefully you're walking out here with something you didn't know before that was intriguing to you, that helps you along in your career. And please spread the word about the user groups. And if you saw anything here tonight, we'd like to see if people are really going to use these videos that we put together. And we'll see you all in 2 months. Thank you.